I think in 20 years, there will be something like Croncat in like all surviving blockchains. I have historically thought of these phrases as like, oh boy, like watch out. You can actually create your own little teeny smart contract. It doesn't have very much logic, but it is allowed to act just like you.
Hello, Mike.
Hey, good to be here.
You're the co-founder of Croncat.
Croncat, right here.
So what does the cat do actually?
The cat helps people really automate things. So maybe the best way to explain this is like blockchains right now are just sort of sitting there, not doing anything. And then when someone, maybe you've done this where you see a Kepler pop up, you say approve, and then you're sending a transaction into the blockchain. And then suddenly this thing that was doing nothing is able to kind of start acting upon what you said to do. And there's really not a way to have something happen in the future on your behalf, for instance. Like let's say there's an NFT drop happening. This is a simple example that is happening in a different time zone maybe, and it's going to be 3 a.m. your time. But you don't want to stay up till 3 a.m. You can actually schedule this thing to happen in the future. And we actually started Croncat, me and my co-founder Trevor, started Croncat at Near Protocol, which is also Rust smart contracts, and really proved out the idea. But then we've rewritten it in CosmWasm baby. And there's a lot more features that make it not just sort of simple tasks that run every few blocks or every week if you want, but we can actually do more if this then that stuff. But we can save that for a little bit later in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. That would be my next question. Like, how do you think will those kind of automation influence the life of people? How does it make my life as a Cosmos user in that case easier?
Yeah, I would say in 2023, we haven't really discovered some like the brand new thing past DeFi. So I think we're all kind of waiting for new technologies to come along and new ideas. So we can stick with DeFi for now. Mm-hmm. I know in other blockchain ecosystems, you are automatically compounding your staking and don't have to do anything. That isn't really the case in Cosmos. So that would be an easy one, for instance, is you can say, I would like to once a week take my Wind DEX holdings, and I would like to claim and withdraw a certain amount into stable coins or something like that, and also like compound the rest of it. So this can actually be done with Croncat. Croncat is actually so generic that it's a little bit hard to explain to people at first, because it's like you can say, I want to do this very specific thing on this one smart contract, and I want it to have even like conditions, like only do this when I reach a certain amount of unclaimed rewards. So you can do that, or you can have it be simple. You can have it be like weekly. We ran into this actually firsthand where Payroll is a really funny thing that in blockchain right now, where a lot of times people have a DAO or they have a multi-sig, and it's actually more of a human coordination problem to try to get everyone to say, okay, it's Friday, we need to pay these 6 people the same amount. And, inevitably someone's going to be out or they're on vacation and they didn't bring their ledger or something. And it's just hard to get people to all vote. So one kind of exciting thing is like Payroll can happen with Croncat, where you all basically create a task one time saying, we want to pay these 6 people in our DAO every Friday at noon. And you agree upon it once, and it creates a Croncat task with that exact sort of transaction, very similar to what you'd click on if you click approve in Kepler. And that is basically that idea of what you want to happen is stored in Croncat. So the next step is the next question maybe is like, how in the world does that get executed? If I just told you that blockchains are basically inert, they're just sitting there and they can't really react. They don't have a clock inside of them naturally. So this is slightly technical, I suppose, but it's not that difficult, I don't think. If you think about oracles, right? You're familiar with oracles.
Like sources for pricing or?
Yes. Yeah. So you might have an oracle, you might have a smart contract that wants to get the price of a token. And so what actually happens sort of under the hood was actually an inspiration for Croncat. So essentially, if you have a smart contract that wants to get the price of something, it will store that request on the blockchain. But then, of course, like there's a barrier between blockchain world and, off-chain world. And the prices are often in the off-chain world. And so you store something in the blockchain, you have something in the off-chain world that is basically looking inside to say, hey, is there anything I can do? And then they will grab a price and then they will send it into the blockchain. What's important to note is that I have my smart contract which desires a price, but it saved the request into a different smart contract. So when the price comes in, it doesn't come to me, it comes to the Oracle smart contract. And this will then in turn say, okay, this is done. Send that price value to my smart contract. So it's very interesting because you can run into problems with oracles where you're like, did they give me the right price? Maybe I need 5 or 6 different people, and did one of them give me $10 more than the others? So there's a problem here. So we can actually sidestep that with Croncat because we have a very similar system where we store these tasks on chain, and then the thing that is off chain and sending in the transaction to sort of kick off the task. This thing off chain, it is not grabbing a price feed. We don't have to trust it. It is querying the blockchain saying, wait, do I have something to do right now? And the answer that it gets back from our smart contracts is not, yes, Julius made a task to do payroll. Please help Julius. It is not that. We intentionally made it not like that. When it asks the Croncat smart contracts, do I have anything to do now? The answer is 6. You have 6 tasks to do. I'm not going to tell you what they are.
Okay.
And so it's very trustless in nature. We don't want people to have any sort of avenues for maybe censoring. Maybe I'm sure you have tons of enemies, right? And so you don't want to have your enemy become an agent. These agents are these off-chain things that will essentially throw transactions at Croncat when the time is right. And we check to make sure that, yes, this agent is allowed to execute this task, and yes, we have approved this agent. So really the whole vision was to have this completely decentralized so that right now, if I were to get hit by a bus, Croncat can actually just live on, because it is just the idea that as long as there's one person who wants to execute a task in the future, like payroll, and there's one person who wants to run a teeny little program on their computer or on their server or even on the Raspberry Pi.
The agent?
The agent, and get paid for it, then we have sort of just this cooperative machine. And so obviously we've spent a lot of time and effort building this. And so, we're trying to recoup costs and, doing the whole startup thing. But at the end of the day, this is actually, it's almost like Web3 is almost like a new town that we're building. And we need schools and we need roads and we need electricity, we need utilities. I feel like Croncat is actually a utility that people can use or not use. But this is an option now that's available for everyone.
And what is your vision for Croncat, or for what Croncat can do in the future? Do you see it as a super essential thing that's in everything we will do in the future, on Cosmos chains?
I think, I've said this before, where I think in 20 years there will be something like Croncat in all surviving blockchains. I think that once you realize that you can automate things, it kind of opens up a whole new world. And here's a small example. So there are new blockchains now that actually are CosmWasm compatible that have very fast block finality, meaning that you can just submit a transaction, boom, it's done. And so this is already opening up avenues for things that you wouldn't want to wait around for with, let's say, a 6-second block time. For instance, a game, right? You could actually start a game where maybe you're competing with 4 other people and you grab a sword and you're attacking each other and it's a free-for-all. Those games really kind of need a timer, maybe this game is supposed to last 10 minutes, right? Or something like that. So you can actually kind of have these sort of systems that we're kind of used to in Web 2 where there's a timed duration. And then of course I think a lot of DeFi things will be very, very useful, especially when you combine the if this then that. I know for myself, one of the things I've failed at in my time in Web3 is, when we're not in the bull market, everything kind of seems fine and I forget to take gains, and I think I'm probably not alone in this. And so what you can do is really just set up, dollar cost averaging, which I initially thought was that sounds like a very fancy financial term. It just means every once in a while, put some of your gains into stablecoins. That's one way of thinking of it. So if we can automate things like this, then I think it'll actually be maybe like safer for kind of like the community. I know it'll be for me because, like that will just mean that this happens and I don't have to be every other day. I have a calendar event to like, hey, take out some of your gains and put it in stable coins so you don't get wrecked. So yeah, I hope people will use it for that and many more things.
And do you see Croncat more like an infrastructure thing to make all that happen, or will you provide apps that use that? Like, because right now you have the infrastructure ready, right? But I think like when you talk about DCAing, technically there could be like 10 different approaches or more. Yeah, a lot of different approaches to make that happen, like super complicated or super easy, or like what calculated finance does, this weight scale in, like where you like the lower the token gets, the higher, the more you buy, and the higher it goes, the less you buy, stuff like this. And I think I guess they're using their own technology, but technically all that would be possible with Croncat too, right? Like,
yeah, I believe so. I think I'm also, there are so many smart people doing DeFi that this is one of the things where I can't really speak the DeFi language in some cases. What I have found is when we talk about Croncat to different DeFi places, like for instance, I've had some great conversations with Astroport, the Wind Dex people. Those are the people that really understand the exact transaction that would be helpful to do over and over again, right? So once you know that, and usually it's not going to be changing that much, it's just like this, that there's one message that I kind of want to do over and over again, and this is going to maximize, kind of my rewards and all that. Those people who are closest to the DEXs are probably the people who can actually make these Croncat tasks. Because again, these tasks are so generic that like you could have a Croncat task that is like, flipping a Boolean from true to false, or powering a game, or doing DeFi, or whatever is next in blockchain. So this actually kind of leads maybe to one idea that the Croncat team had. Of course, we are in the bear market, and we're having a very hard time with funding. So we will see how this like progresses. But the idea that like the people who know the insides of the DeFi, like you're mentioning, they can actually like make a Croncat like task that is not just useful for them, but for other people. And there's this idea that would not be hard to implement. Basically saying like, hey, this is like a template, and like Julius spent 3 hours kind of figuring this out, and he wants to put it up in a marketplace, and this could be treated like an app from the App Store. Basically, someone else could say, oh, I don't want to spend 3 hours doing that. I would just like to buy this and give Julius a royalty, and then you buy it once, and then it's kind of yours to use forever. So this is kind of like the next phase of Croncat. Might have to wait for a little bit, but yeah, the idea of like getting people to kind of contribute in this and like help others understand like how to best leverage Croncat.
So it will be like an app store for those little strategies.
Yes.
That are getting executed, right?
Yes.
And will that be usable for normal for
Yes.
normal people? So will there be a UI and all that stuff?
Yes. So we have like actually a very beautiful UI. Shout out to Trevor. He's just done an amazing job. There's no way I could ever pull off. I mean, I'm sure you at Design DAO would. I don't know if you've seen the website, but it is just like amazing, and it kind of has like pop-ups saying, I want this task to perform, even like when this NFT goes into this person's hands, or very, very granular. That is quite a big challenge, because also Croncat is deployed on can be deployed on any CosmWasm chain, and so that means that it's a very difficult task actually to have a website that does like all that Croncat is capable of doing, because we're connecting to different chains where there's all these kinds of different things we want to do. But yeah, I would say that the sort of point and click interface is like getting very close right now, but it is like a monumental task. So it's not quite here yet. It's also just from a sort of a strategy point of view in terms of, where we are in kind of the bear market and funding situation. It's interesting to think what is the best place to spend sort of our time. And so I could be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong, but I'm really focusing on integration. So like, for instance, Astroport and, Neutron has DAO, for instance, as sort of a replacement to the typical governance modules that are usually there. And I mean, I believe that they're going to be using DAO to hold like pretty significant treasuries. And then they could have like, payroll, and they could have like streaming payments that happen. Something like Patreon is absolutely now possible with Croncat. Wasn't really possible before. So I think we're going to start like seeing these kinds of things, and that's why I'm a little bit more focusing on like talking to the devs to say, hey, you're building a smart contract wallet and it has Croncat baked in. Well, this is going to be like really good for both of us and good for the end users too, because now you can do much better things that you weren't able to do. So we might have a little bit of a pause on the point and click side of things as we kind of like drill down on the like amazing sort of foundational things that are being built in Cosmos.
What if people want to run those agents and earn money or like
Yes.
cat tokens, or what are they getting?
Yes. We thought a lot about the idea of a cat token, and I think at this point it's just like a little bit too much to kind of wrap our heads around. So we're just going back to the regular model of like every single time a task is essentially fulfilled, it's executed, then there's going to be some low amount. We want this amount to be so low that it's almost negligible. It's going to be interesting because, there's not too many users in Cosmos, so we're trying to figure out how to strike the balance between kind of funding and all of that. And we will try this approach of hitting, we originally thought 20 cents per execution. I went for just a really round number just so we can actually run this for maybe 6 months and see how it's going to work. So 10 cents, I'm targeting 10 cents. And so every time a task is fulfilled, like 6 cents goes to the Croncat DAO, right? And then 4 cents will be going to this agent. So it is actually profitable. And again, you can actually run this little daemon on a Raspberry Pi, like a very low powered machine. Just have it like running in your living room. And as soon as you just start the daemon and set it up, then it just kind of like runs automatically. And it is fulfilling tasks. And then once you reach a certain balance, then it will withdraw the money, and it's just...
Which is a Croncat task, I guess?
So it gets paid sort of in a little like vault sort of thing, because you don't want to be sending little teeny transactions all the time. It's expensive. So it automatically be like, oh, hey, I've got like, $50. Now I'm going to automatically withdraw. Or you can withdraw to your own personal account. You can just have your agent that is just running there and then just gives it to your regular account. You're like, oh, cool, I got money. Nice. One small caveat here. So we got a amazing security audit done by Oak Security. This is my first time like really having a security audit like of my own project, and they did an amazing job. One of the bullet points they mentioned as like not critical, but there's different severities. This is a critical bug, this is a moderate bug. One of the ones that was like less critical was their suggestion that maybe we don't have everyone be able to register to be an agent yet, basically, even though our entire code base is built around this. The entire thing like was made so that anyone can become an agent. And if you're an agent and you refuse to, fulfill tasks, or maybe your power went out or, something, then you actually get kicked out so that new people
immediately
can come in. It will be after a certain amount. Yeah. After a certain amount, we're keeping statistics on like who is actually fulfilling tasks and whatnot. But back to sort of the agent situation. So given their recommendation, they said, let's have like a whitelist for agents right now. And so when I was giving my workshop at Awesome Wasm, one of the best conferences I've been to in my life, I was giving a workshop and I said on video, I'm just like, if you came to Berlin to learn about Awesome Wasm and you're here and you're sitting down in this like wonderful boat area, like just talk to me, I'll let you be an agent. Like let's start doing this like decentralization. So this is kind of what people refer to as like progressive decentralization. Sometimes blockchains even will do this, where they're actually running a lot of the nodes themselves, and then there's a moment where they say, okay, now we are like turning all of ours off and it is like actually decentralized. So we're going to be doing the same thing with Croncat. I think there's a couple of fixes I might want to make just for ease of use for setting up an agent. But like, I'd love to have you set up an agent if you want to. It's not that bad.
Cool. Yeah, I would love to like check it out, the whole process of setting that up. So how does AuthZ play into the whole thing of Croncat? Yes,
this is a fun thing that is like very, very new, actually. So a week before this conference, a few of us, including you, we got together and we just said, hey, conference is happening, but it's going to be really busy. Let's all just kind of hang out and have conversations. And during that time, it feels like a bunch of people have been thinking all these different thoughts, but once you combine them together, then you really get to see the big picture, which is, I think, what kind of happened there. And particularly this happened with this Cosmos SDK module called AuthZ, AuthZ. It's kind of a weird name. But what this means is basically I can delegate another address to essentially be me, right? So for instance, one thing that happened before this trip was I have a ledger which has a little bit of Atom on it, and that's a little bit of a pain to restake. I have to do everything like every couple of days. So I set up an AuthZ grant saying like, this ledger and all the Atom that it holds is going to allow this other address, not full privileges to move all the tokens or anything, but just the privilege to execute one specific type of transaction in Cosmos, which is called like message delegate. And this is actually a kind of a fun little tidbit that I found on Twitter from Asaf and Larry. Is how we're used to clicking claim and then you click restake? You actually don't need to do that. You can actually just like say, I'm going to delegate, and it will do the claim and restake on in the same action, which is kind of interesting. It sort of got lost almost. So back to the ledger, like this ledger said, okay, this other address is only allowed to delegate on my behalf. And what's really interesting here is to kind of pause on this is like, that means that the seed phrase for this other address isn't really that scary if you lose it. Like people couldn't really do much. They couldn't like take my Atom or anything. And I really think it's good to like start thinking of this idea that different addresses like this one or smart contracts can actually like act on behalf of you in very specific ways that you want. And so this really sort of ties into like a fundamental problem, I suppose, with Croncat is I think a lot of these use cases, especially like for DeFi, what you want to happen is you want to automatically, compound your wind or something like that. Mm-hmm. But if you make a Croncat task, it lives in the Croncat, one of the Croncat smart contracts. And so when it's actually going to send that task out, it is coming from Croncat. It's not coming from you, right? So I'm like, oh, shoot, this is like a big problem. And so after a lot of thought, we realized that you can actually create like your own little teeny smart contract. Doesn't have very much logic, but it is allowed to act just like you. So then we can have a Croncat task that will actually call this smart contract and then do actions on your behalf just as if it were you. Mm-hmm. Because originally we were thinking that like, we might have to have someone sort of withdraw all their funds and put it to a new address, but you don't actually have to with AuthZ.
So that means, what does that enable? It's like more secure to use Croncat, or so it means like my funds stay where they are. I give that other address the right to do a specific thing with those, but not withdraw them or send them somewhere else. And Croncat access that and can use that wallet or like smart contract, right?
Yeah, it's just a smart contract, and it does this thing. I like to think of it as like it writes down a message saying like, I want to call wind dex and execute this one method, and here's the parameters. And then it folds up the message and it puts it in an envelope, and that envelope is sort of called like AuthZ exec, and then it sort of gives that to the blockchain. The blockchain unwraps it and it says, okay, this message says that like, on behalf of Mike, I'm going to do these actions. Wait, does this contract have the ability to do this? Yes, it does. Okay, then it's good. And then if you look on like MintScan, it will look just like you did it.
And what kind of stuff is possible with that, with Croncat? Is there, I mean, I know that you can also like say those tokens can be spent on X, but not on Y, right? And stuff like this.
Yeah.
What is your vision for that? What could be enabled?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like at this last hackathon, I feel like we are all still imagining like what we can do here. One thing that I remember from, I was at Near Protocol for 2 years and 3 months, and met some really amazing people. One thing they have there is called like function call access keys, very, very similar, where like you can just basically add and remove keys that have very specific permissions, right? And one thing that's really neat about that is you can actually, maybe you have a website that you frequent often, and you can actually store one of these AuthZ sort of seed phrases to an account inside of your browser. Now, usually you don't want to do that because you're in Starbucks, you go to the bathroom, someone runs off with your computer, and they can get your seed phrase, right? But what if that seed phrase isn't really that useful? If they can only just like compound for you on your behalf, it's like not really that valuable to them. And so I think this opens up the possibility for that kind of user experience where you can actually have a seed phrase inside of your browser that just kind of lives there. And furthermore, that means that you don't even have to like have a Kepler pop-up, for instance.
You mean like a wallet that is super restricted, that gives me comfort features?
Yes.
Like I can restake, I can use some kind of like a little tiny bit of those tokens maybe, but nothing more. And that way I can like just walk freely. Like I don't have to care about security that much. And
yeah, I think it's going to take you're right on the money. Like it's going to take a little bit of change in mentality where it's like we think of seed phrases. I have historically thought of seed phrases as like, oh boy, like watch out, don't let that leak. You know, it's like extremely secure, but it doesn't really need to be that way all the time. And so this sort of like really, really restrictive way that AuthZ can work is going to be amazing. And I wish I actually had a better answer. We should have this conversation in like 6 months from now, because I think that there's a lot of us who are just having this sort of epiphany that like there's a lot of account abstraction that is really baked in here. What's fascinating too is that AuthZ isn't new. I don't know. Maybe it's, I want to say like at least 1.5 years old. 2 years maybe?
Yeah, I think I heard about it a year ago.
I read a blog by Noam Cohen who just really went over like in great detail like what will be possible with AuthZ. And then as I was thinking about this whole idea of having like different keys for your account, I thought it was a brand new idea maybe. And then I go and I look at the AuthZ sort of the history in GitHub, and Sunny from Osmosis is like, we should have this AuthZ thing so we can make subkeys. So this is like, it's been possible for like years, literally, but we just haven't put the pieces together. And I think that's just normal. This is like, you know, the early Web3 is just like wild. Everyone's busy doing everything. But I think that now we can actually show off some of the use cases. Yeah, it's going to be great.
If people want to check out Croncat or also maybe apply as agents, I don't know if that's open, or like contact you and talk about it. Where would they go?
Yeah, cron.cat, you know, one of the best domains ever, is our website, and we're Croncats on Twitter. Someone took Croncat on Twitter, dang it. And I will say too that the documentation isn't perfect, but docs.cron.cat really will go over like some examples. I even made a video. I really enjoy video editing and sort of like trying to do my part to help educate people on how all this stuff works. So I made a pretty good video of a very, very simple use case of Croncat and demonstrating that people who want to really add automation into their smart contracts, their DApp, they can. So it's not just like, you know, you can point and click and create a Croncat task. Yes, you can also like create a game, like I was saying earlier, that inside your smart contract, you are creating Croncat tasks. And then we get into more details, like you can actually make sure that when you are getting called by Croncat, that it was your task. You don't want someone else's task to call you and kind of fool you. So all of that stuff is covered in the docs. I think that I would love to hear feedback on that. And we will have the point and click going as soon as we can. But yeah, there's a lot to discover with AuthZ. And I think that a bunch of different projects are going to be really discovering like the account abstraction and how that fits into Croncat. Because really what we're trying to do is just allow people to make more interesting applications on blockchain. And I think this is how we double down on making Cosmos unique and how we attract people to build like truly unique apps.
Cool. Yeah. Let's talk in 6 months when there's more AuthZ stuff going on at Croncat. And yeah, thanks for being here. And
thank you.
Until next time.